My next guest is a highly respected cardiologist and a phenomenal author. And today she is also an inspiration like no other, overcoming unbearable pain, a pain that has transformed her life and the way she views medicine. With that, we welcome Dr. Monica Aggarwal to the Exam Room Live. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Chuck, for having me.
It's great to see you again. When you and I were talking about your book, Body on Fire, I was blown away. I honestly, at that point, did not yet realize that you had been through the thick of it yourself as an RA sufferer. So I'm really glad that you're able to almost check that doctor portion of yourself today. And I want to focus more on your story as the patient, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Um, your road to becoming a doctor, let's start with this, has not always been easy. You know, some people do it a little bit more quickly. It took you, I believe, 10 years to get through all of your training. And then you have also written eloquently about the challenges that came from just being a woman in medicine as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about that decade-long journey just to get into where it is that you are?
Yeah, so becoming a cardiologist is not a easy process. So it started when you're 18 years old and you have this actually, interestingly, I was a religion major in college. My parents wanted me to be a doctor, or Indian parents. Always, you have to be a doctor or engineer. It's sort of the thing. And so my parents wanted me to be a doctor. So of course, naturally, being American born, fought that and had my own independent ideas. And I did economics for a while. I did a little this for a little while, a little that for a while. I thought I was going to be a philosophy major. Ultimately, majored in religious studies, interestingly, with a focus in Buddhism. But my dad said that he would not pay for my college if I didn't finish. He wouldn't pay for my college unless I did some sort of science component. So I got a minor in biology. So that's how I got around it. And then when I finished, when I got through, when I was in the middle of college, at the end of college, I started meeting some influential mentors of my sisters. My sister was already in medical school and really made me see sort of that, yeah, I actually think that being a doctor would be pretty awesome. And I had a specific mentor in college named Richard Edlick, who was a plastic surgeon who developed debilitating multiple sclerosis and was in a wheelchair. And he took me under his wing, and I worked with him a lot. And he really showed me that there's such a connection between between religion and medicine, interestingly. So when I went into medical school, you go through 4 years of medical school. Then after you graduate medical school, you do 3 years of internal medicine. And then after that, you have to do 3 more years of cardiology. So by the time you finish your training, you're older. It takes from the time you're 18, effectively medical school residency. So that's already 11 years or so of training, and many of us go on further to get further subspecialty in prevention or interventional cardiology. So it can end up being 10 to 12 years. So by the time you finish all your training, you are realizing that you are at the time where you want to have kids and your clock is ticking, so to speak. That's a tricky thing. And so some people say, well, why don't you have kids while you're in training? But cardiology in general and subspecialty medicine is not a women's game. It is a man's game, and it's not well looked upon if you get pregnant in your program. Now, people will say outwardly, yes, it's okay, and nobody would say anything. Well, nobody does still say anything, but it's always there. It's always in the room that this person took off 3 months for pregnancy. And so for whatever reasons, I felt I couldn't have a child while I was in residency or in my fellowship training, because somebody has to cover you all the time. Somebody has to cover you when you're not working. And so it's already such an intense time where you're taking so much call. And then if one person is not there, then your call is just doubled. And it's really difficult for those other people. And it creates a lot of malintent, unfortunately. So, being a woman in medicine is very challenging. I think it's interesting. About 50% of people, women, 50% of medical school actually is women right now. And in pediatrics, you're going to see actually more women than you're going to see men. In internal medicine, I think it's about 50-50. But once you go into subspecialty like cardiology, only about 10 to 12% of the group of cardiologists is going to be a female, and there's so few female faculty that it's a real problem. And ironically, physicians and female physicians are considered to be better doctors because we tend to be more emotional, more in tune to sort of the other factors take in terms of taking care of patients. Yet somehow only 10 to 12% of cardiologists are women. So that's really a tenth. So, there was a lot of pressure to go through. And I think that once I finished training, I definitely was like, oh my God, I got to have kids. So that's what I did.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you had them in quick succession, 1, 2, and 3, just back to back to back. Were you able at all to, I mean, continue in medicine? Like, how did you balance the schedule? I mean, 3 kids for anybody is a lot, and then to be in medicine as well. I mean, I just can't even imagine that you were getting more than 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night at best.
Yeah, so it was a crazy life. So what I maybe haven't told you or didn't write in the book is that so when I first decided that I wanted to have kids, I decided to get pregnant in the end of my third year of training. So this is now my 10th year of training after you decide, okay, like if I plan it just right, because in your mind, women, we all do this. And this is something that I try when I mentor younger women. I say, it's completely unpredictable. So when you think you can plan out pregnancies and deliveries and everything's going to go exactly the way you want it, but it's so hard it's so far from the truth. So when I was in my last year of training, I decided to get pregnant. So that because I finished, the way I worked it out in my head is that I would deliver the kid right when I finished my training and I wouldn't affect anybody. But I actually had 3 miscarriages in a row. One of my first miscarriage actually was pretty far along, and it was devastating. And then continued to have another miscarriage. I had a OBGYN, and this is when I started realizing, God, how much compassion is needed in medicine. I remember telling the OB, crying with the OBGYN saying, I said, when can I start trying to have another baby? And he said, well, you can try again whenever you're ready to lose the baby again. And I thought that was the most horrifying thing I've ever heard for somebody to say, is that you are ready to have another baby when you're ready to lose the baby. And so that because the miscarriage rate is so high at 20%, he was correct, but the way he said it was just horrifying. So I had 3 miscarriages, which was very complicating. They could never figure out why I had so many miscarriages. And then when I got pregnant the 4th time, the baby took and it stayed, and that's my boy. And so now you can imagine, so I did all that training, then I had multiple miscarriages. And so by the time I really started having kids, I was really feeling the time. So, I'll tell you, when I had my first kid, I was on the moon. It was amazing to have a kid, to be able to appreciate the fact that after so much trying to have this child, there was nothing that was going to make it not a pleasant experience for me, no matter the amount I tore in my pregnancy, the 2.5 hour pushing, the post when he delivered, when he turned yellow, the nursing, the pain. I mean, there were so many things, but I was still just so happy to have this little guy, and it was wonderful. So because of that time clock that we keep talking about, I decided to have multiple children quickly. You just didn't know, because I knew that having had all those miscarriages, I knew that I may not have that much time. What if I miscarry again? There could be a huge gap in between the kids. But interestingly, as soon as we started trying, we became pregnant again. And so I always joke with my friends or my patients even will say, oh, I remember you when you were pregnant. I'll say, oh, there was a 6-year period I was either pregnant or nursing. So I was big in the tummy or big in the breast. Whatever one of those times, I was always it was always one or the other. But that's how it was. Like I literally was pregnant and nursing for 6 years, because as soon as I delivered and we were sort of emotionally ready, like, okay, we want to start trying again, I would get pregnant immediately. It was like my body finally figured it out, and we just started having kids. So yes, I had 3 kids under 4. I had a 3.5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn. Yes, life was crazy. I was working full time. I only took 6 weeks off in between, maybe 8 weeks off in between each pregnancy, because that's what I felt I had to do as a physician. So people weren't covering me. And I think that's probably a little bit on me, or a lot of us as physicians, as women, female physicians. We don't want to have other people taking care of our responsibilities. We're taught to sort of chin up. And so I took 6 or 8 weeks off and then went back to work. So I was covering call and working full time. And so I always describe that, I'd be on the phone with somebody having a heart attack in the emergency room and having to guide the ER team on what I wanted to be done. And there would be a baby on my breast, that would be cooing in the background. So that was my life. And so it was a crazy time where I was pureeing baby food. I was pumping, nursing, sleeping, maybe 3-4 hours a night. If I was lucky, 5. I was trying to run because I had to get fit again and recover from my baby weight each time. And it was a crazy, crazy life.
And I mean, such a stressful schedule, not a whole heck of a lot of time. Were you then falling prey to the standard American diet, which is largely grab and go, a lot of fast food, a lot of heavily processed food? What was it that you were eating really at that time?
So at the time, I would say that I was vegetarian at the time, but I was sort of a bad vegetarian. Agree that I was eating a lot of like cheese sticks. I remember cheese sticks were a big go-to for me. I would eat a lot of dairy. Dairy was a big thing for me, so I would have a lot of cheese. Cheese sticks were regular. I would try to have fruits and stuff, and I wasn't a big processed food eater, but enough different, and just sort of more consumption than actually using, for sure. And I wasn't somebody who picked up chips necessarily, but I would be known to microwave food that I'd prepared before, or I'd get an instant meal for the family. If needed, and maybe not as many fruits and vegetables because you just can't get to the grocery store. And so that was sort of the way I ate. And often, sadly, I didn't eat. There were hours, I would spend 8 hours or 10 hours a day not eating. I remember my urine would be crystallized because I just hadn't eaten, and I was nursing, which dehydrates you too. And then I'd be constipated because I was totally dehydrated. I wasn't eating super well. And nursing makes you wicked constipated. Nobody talks about that. But so all of those things, plus I was working 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day as I was managing these 3 kids. So life was absolutely crazy. And I don't look at that time period of my life the way I handled it with great pride, because I was it was crazy.
Well, let's talk about the toll then it began to take on you physically. You've written that you started to experience pain and it increased exponentially rather quickly. What was the first thing that you noticed and how did it progress?
So when the third was 4.5 months old, around there, I started developing joint pain, and all it was out of the blue. I mean, I'm a runner. I was a marathoner, and I started with my finger. I always start rubbing my finger because I always remember that finger being the source of pain first. And it got red hot and swollen. And I remember thinking how odd it was that the finger was all uncomfortable. And I thought, oh, I must have hit it somewhere. And then I ignored it and let it go away. And then it was my shoulder. And my shoulder started getting hot and I couldn't lift it up. And that caused a lot of pain. And then that went away. And then it was another finger. And then it was my knees. And then it was my feet. And, the feet, I remember my feet in particular because every time I would step, I would feel like there was glass or cutting through my feet. In fact, my husband remembers how I used to change my shoes. I kept buying new shoes because I thought there was something wrong with the shoes. That's why I couldn't step down so easily. I would go to the hospital, but somebody who usually runs up the stairs, I would try to find elevators on the other sides of the hospital where people couldn't see me taking the elevator, because I couldn't climb the steps with any grace. I remember that I was extremely tired, and I used to blame that on just having 3 kids and having a full-time job. But the joints just continued to get worse and worse. I remember that I couldn't do the fine motor skills of just putting my fingers together. In fact, the snaps on babies' clothes, they used to drive me crazy. And I remember sitting on at 2 a.m. clipping the baby's clothes, thinking I'm going to write a letter to, I don't know, Carter's or Baby Gap or wherever the clothes were from, and say that they shouldn't make clothes with snaps because that's too hard for people to do, to make that snapping motion, because I couldn't do it, because clearly the clothes were the problem and not me. And so that's how things went for months. And then for weeks, sorry, it just went so quickly. And I remember there was one day that everything sort of came to a head. And that day, still to me, is a painful one to talk about. It was the day that I remember it was like 4 a.m. The alarm had gone off for me to get up. And so for me, the ritual of the morning is complex, or was complex. I have to first wake up, take the dogs out. So I would hobble down the stairs and take the dogs out. Then I would have to start making meals. So I have 2 kids that had to go to daycare. And then I had the baby that needed to be nursed. And then I had to make my lunch. The dogs had to be fed. So all of this stuff. And then I had to be ready to go to work because I started clinic at 8 o'clock. So all of this stuff between 4 and, leaving by 7 or 7 o'clock, or in order to get everybody where they needed to get. So I remember that day because I went down the stairs hobbling, let the dogs out, and was getting started on my morning. And the baby started crying. And if the baby starts crying, the baby's room was right near the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old's room. So I was worried that the other kids would wake up. And so I was like, oh my God, and so I started running towards the stairs to go pick up the baby. But I couldn't get up the stairs that day. I had to crawl up the stairs that day because I just couldn't make it up. And my husband, he found me at the bottom of the crib crying, and the baby screaming because I actually couldn't get the baby out of the crib. I couldn't get up to her crib and do the reaching motion so that I could pick her up. So that's where he found me. And it was at that point when he lifted up the baby and put her in my arms so I could nurse her, that I realized that I was really in trouble. Something very bad was happening to me.
And how old were you at this point, if you don't mind my asking?
So I was probably 37, 36, 36.
Still, relatively young. And for somebody that age, even though you had been pushing yourself to the max between your career and your family, to be having something this severe occurring to your body must have, frankly, just scared the bejesus out of you.
It did. But what I think that shocked me most is how quickly everything just escalated. I went from being such an active runner to like literally not being able to climb the stairs. I mean, can you imagine the humility of just sitting there on the ground? My breasts were leaking because the baby's crying and I could not get her out of the crib. It was an incredible moment, and one that I don't remember and think of fondly. And so I did what any good physician does. I started treating myself for Lyme disease because I decided that I had migratory joint pain. I lived in a wooded area. I must have Lyme disease. So I started myself on antibiotics, thinking I'm going to get better within a week or two. And I just continued to get worse and worse. I had a friend of mine draw some blood for me, and my blood work was completely abnormal. All my inflammatory markers were elevated, and my autoimmune factors were abnormal. My rheumatoid factor was, if the normal is, I don't remember offhand, 0 to 10 or something, mine was greater than 50. So she checked in something called an anti-CCP antibody, which is shows prognosis in rheumatoid arthritis. So it shows how sort of debilitating your illness will be. And mine, I think it's supposed, I can't remember the numbers offhand. It's supposed to be less than, 0 to 10 or something like that, let's just say. And mine was greater than 250. So it was at that point that I said that, okay, I'm going to go see a rheumatologist. So I went to the best rheumatologist in town. I was in Maryland at the time. And I went to Hopkins and I saw a rheumatologist there. And he told me that I had a poor prognostic form or a devastating form of rheumatoid arthritis. He said that the disease was incurable and that I needed to get used to the idea that I have an illness and that this is my future, that I will be on medications for the rest of my life. And if I got on medications now, within a week, then I had the best shot of doing okay. He painted a very grim picture. The waiting room was grim. It was hard to walk through the waiting room where everybody's in wheelchairs and canes, and such a difficult moment. Hearing all those things, I remember when I asked, well, what if I try other things? He said, well, you can try anything, but nothing's going to work. This is the future. This is what you have to get used to.
Mm. Boy, I can't even imagine what would be running through your head at that point. Still relatively early on in your medical career, a cardiologist. Obviously, this is going to greatly impact that. But then I think the greater toll would be, how are you going to raise your kids? If things are as dire as the doctor is saying, how in the world are you going to be effective as a mother? Talk about the emotions that came with all of that, and how you were, just wrestling with it.
I think that this is a topic certainly that we don't talk enough about, and admittedly, I have trouble myself talking about. You know, I think women are superheroes, and I really think that we do so much that is ridiculous and crazy, and we're not good about asking for help. And I wanted to be perfect at everything. I wanted to be a great doctor, but more importantly, I wanted to be a great mom. Like I remember there were times at midnight I'd be making cupcakes for the kids to go to school so they could take them for school. I mean, they were 2 years old and 4 years old, but I felt I had to make the cupcakes for the birthday. So I would be doing the icing at night. And then I would not even be there in the morning for them to see the joy of seeing the cupcakes in the morning. And I was pureeing baby food and pumping all the time, and just so they had enough milk. And so you feel like you have to do all these things, but you want to do it. I had all those miscarriages, and I really wanted to be this great mom. Like I wanted to just enjoy that time. And so when you get an illness diagnosis and you're told that you're not sure how things are going to go, you're not sure how your practice cardiology is, and the fact that I couldn't even snap or climb the stairs, and you see all those wheelchairs in the waiting room, it puts you in a really dark place. I remember I was getting some sort of scan done, and I remember I was in a wheelchair. They put you in a wheelchair, and it was a huge wheelchair, and I was this tiny person. I remember how you feel so small. And it's that classic doctor becoming the patient. You really start understanding what it's like when you're the doctor, you tell patients, I used to tell patients, oh, the risk is 1 in 1,000. It's never going to happen. But when you're the patient, you start realizing that you are thinking you could be that 1 in 1,000. And so you start thinking about things totally differently when all of a sudden the side effect profiles are being said, because I was told the medicines I was going to start won't cause any problems. Most people tolerate them just fine. It's 1 in 1,000 that you could have liver failure. But I would dream at night that I was going to be the one to have liver failure and not wake up in the morning. And what would my kids do? Who was going to take care of them? And don't get me wrong, I have an amazing husband who does so much and is so helpful. but to not have a 4-month old who I'm nursing, then not have their mom, and so this is where you think, and maybe it's not totally logical, and I'm an extremely logical person, but when you get an illness or when something happens to you, logic so much of the time goes out the window and emotion takes over, for everyone, I think. And I think it's that emotional, that's fear. I was so scared, I was so nervous. My husband and I would just hold hands, and he would just squeeze my hand and say, it's going to be okay, we're going to get through this. And some people would say, well, gosh, it was just rheumatoid arthritis, like it wasn't that bad. But to me, because of how much I'd fallen from where I was, and how much I felt like I was going to be in a wheelchair. I'd wake up dreaming that I would be in a wheelchair in a week. And that is hard to overcome.
And you were put on medication there, but I understand that there were some side effects. So you did see some improvement, but there was a lot that came with that as well. What was the treatment plan you were given, and what were those side effects you were experiencing?
So the standard of care for rheumatoid arthritis is to be started on steroids, usually initially, to deal with the acute inflammation. So steroids cause you to be puffy, they make you gain weight. And people always say, like, what can't you just control your appetite? Well, you just feel this munchy feeling all the time. You get nauseous from the steroids as well, which makes you want to eat breads and refined carbohydrates. And then you're started on disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. They're called DMARDs for short. And those are medications like methotrexate, which is standard of care for rheumatoid arthritis. With that, that's the one that can cause liver dysfunction. Again, it's the amount that you get more than one dose, although you can have an acute response. But most people, you build up over time, and you have to monitor liver function tests regularly, usually every 3 months, to make sure your liver is handling the methotrexate. Then you're given folic acid, because you have to be on folic acid while you take methotrexate. And then you're given, if you have a side effect problem with one of those medications, you could be put on another medicine, which I was offered at one point. And if those fail, you are given biologic medications. So you use immune blockers, and those medications are injectables, and that's sort of the next stage. So I was started on prednisone and methotrexate to start, as well as folic acid. I was told that I needed to stop nursing my kid within a week. And so if anybody's ever nursed a baby, that may be the most tragic thing that I felt, was having to give that up. So if you can imagine, and maybe this is too much detail, but I remember having these engorged breasts full of milk, and the baby would cry, and then I had to walk away. And so I had to walk to the other room, and my husband would have to give her a formula bottle when had to make my milk go away. And so over a week, maybe the hardest week, I made the milk go away, and then I started medication. So within a couple, you have symptoms, like you take it once a week, and I can't remember exactly, but I remember I felt better in terms of the joints pretty quickly. But I think that was mostly because of the steroids. Remember, the steroids are fairly short acting. Steroids made me not sleep well at night. They make you a little hyper. Again, there was the eating issue. But then when I started on methotrexate, I had a lot of side effects, like I had a lot of nausea. Started losing my hair, would just fall out in the shower. And then sensitivity to the sun, anemia. These are sort of standard side effects. And I remember people telling me how amazing it was that I'd lost all my baby weight. It was really that I just didn't want to eat because I was nauseous all the time. So, it's a funny time. Nobody, talks about sort of the evil underbelly of medications, and that sort of humbleness, and how fragile you feel, where we all carry these exterior coats of armor, and that inside is sort of falling apart.
And had you given any thought as to what caused all of this in the first place? Were you looking at your diet? Did you think maybe your pregnancies had triggered this? Was it genetic?
Yeah, so I don't have any rheumatoid or autoimmune illness in my family, but for some reason I do have some sort of genetic code that tells me that I should have rheumatoid arthritis. But why is it that a person, or why did I get the RA at that time? Well, the medical thought is that the pregnancy is a hyperimmune, hyperhormonal time. And during pregnancy, actually, very commonly, people post pregnancy will develop autoimmune illness. I didn't start thinking about lifestyle for several months after I started getting better, until I met some people, and met a woman in particular named Karen. And Karen was a nutrition consultant, and she wanted to come to one of my events. Like, I used to run these prevention programs even back then, just to measure blood pressure and cholesterol to get people motivated to change. And she was like, well, what about a nutrition component? And I said, well, I got that nutrition thing, eat better, eat less fat. And she said, well, I think there's more to it than that. And I probably was cocky and obnoxious, like, I got this. And she said, why don't I do your dietary profile? Let me just do it for you. And so I remember being like, I don't really need any help. I'm already vegetarian. I got this. So, but I did it. I did this dietary profile, and she came over to my house, and we chatted about it. And she said, I think there's some problems in your diet. And we started talking about it. It was the first time I started thinking about how diet can impact your lifestyle. So, and how that lifestyle could then affect your ability to get illness. So I think one thing that people maybe don't understand, and maybe I certainly didn't understand, is that I think people have genetic predisposition to illnesses. We can't change our parents. We're going to get the heart disease, the cholesterol, the blood pressure, autoimmune, celiac disease. Some of that stuff is predisposed because we have genetic code for it. But what turns that gene on? Like, what is the epigenetics? What surrounds that gene that makes that gene trigger? Well, what if you consider, and so most of us in science, we would say, well, the gene gets activated. It was the pregnancy that triggered it. And then our job is to treat the inflammation acutely. That was the prednisone. And then we are going to treat the illness with those disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. So that's the standard treatment. But what if you think about it differently and you say, okay, well, yes, I had a genetic illness that I was destined to get, or maybe not destined to get. Maybe the pregnancy triggered it, but maybe it was also that I had a really bad lifestyle where I slept 3 or 4 hours a night. I was woken up all night because of the baby. I was working full time. I had 3 kids. I was trying to exercise. I was trying to be a super person. And I was stressed all the time, and I was falling apart. And it's that sort of milieu where your resources are not keeping up with the demands on your body that then also triggers inflammation. So maybe pregnancy was always going to trigger rheumatoid arthritis for me, but maybe I made it so much easier because my milieu, all the other things I was doing to myself was making me worse. So then if you think of it that way, then there should be a way to treat that milieu. So maybe you don't activate that gene, or if you do activate it, you should be able to suppress it. So that's when I started thinking a lot about those other factors. That's when I started thinking about the diet, and maybe not just diet, but sleep and stress and exercise and the impact of all these things on your body, and how those things can change how you do or how you respond to your genetic information. So you have the genetic code you have. You can't change that, but you can change how your body responds to it. And I think that's the fundamental key that people don't get. And I certainly did not. And that even if you do get illness, there's ways to suppress it. And that is the money.
So what were
So,
some of the things that you and this dietitian came up with as far as changing your diet? What were some of the bigger changes that were made?
so her big thing for me was that I was eating too much dairy, and I was eating a lot of simple sugars. Um, So I changed everything. I didn't just change one thing. I went gangbusters. She started me off on this process of reading and understanding about dairy. I started looking at things which led me into the area of the gut. And then I started becoming obsessed with the gut. So I started going to conferences. I remember going to a conference at Harvard, meeting a fabulous guy named Alessio Fasano, who actually helped me write the microbiome chapter of our book on Body on Fire. And he's over at Harvard right now. And I went and he's just an incredible person. And I remember trying to understand the mechanism for why all these things then affect your cause inflammation. And so much of that is there's multiple issues. There's sympathetic tone or an imbalance between high levels of sympathetic overdrive versus parasympathetic, which is your rest and recovery. So there's that stress response. But then there's also at the level of the gut, there's the microbiome. So the gut bugs that you have change depending on what you eat and how you sleep and how your day to day is. And then you have, not only do you have those gut bugs that change, and there's also the way the gut bug or how the intestinal cells, they stick together, and if they break apart you can get something called a leaky gut. So there's so many different levels where your things that are happening and that you're doing in your lifestyle are affecting sympathetic and parasympathetic tone, like stress. Then there's also the gut biome, the actual bugs that are changing based on what you're doing, and then the actual concept of the leaky gut. So it's 3 levels of where you could be damaging or impacting your response to illness.
And so I mean, essentially, it sounds to me, based off of what you're describing, is you're kind of going through medical school again. I mean, you are acquiring a ton of knowledge at this point, and it had to have been exciting for you to not only be acquiring this knowledge, but I'm assuming throughout this process, your own health is improving.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the coolest part. And that's, why I always, so yes, so it was the first time I felt like I was totally in control of my learning. Like, it's not that medical school wasn't my choice, it was, but you have to like do what everything you do is sort of required and you just got to go through it. But this time it was really personal, right? I needed to figure out how to heal myself. So I was going to these conferences and trying to read everything I could. It's not taught in medical school. Nutrition isn't taught in medical school. Lifestyle is not taught in medical school. And so that's the funny thing, right? And so, we actually studied this, and like over 90% of cardiologists will tell you that they had no nutrition education in all of their training. Cardiologists, like, we should be good at nutrition, but we aren't because we're not taught it. So yeah, I went through everything again, but in a way it was a joy because I was able to read about it, think about it, meet people that were doing sort of cutting edge stuff, and then try to implement it in my own life. And then I would test my labs and see what would happen. So I did. I started changing everything. I started cutting out. I cut out dairy first. That was the hardest thing for me because I loved, as you could tell, I was eating cheese like crazy. But I always tell people, because people say, "Oh, that'll be really hard for me too." I always tell people, you know what? Yeah, change is hard. Change is really hard, but you know what? Feeling better is worth every single moment of that change, because it was absolutely worth it. And so I started cutting out dairy. I started eating whole grains. I started cutting out sugar sweetened foods. I started eating everything fresh, and I ate loads and loads of fiber. I remember being like, "What is happening to my gut, dear God?" But I ate everything. I ate so much fiber, and anybody who starts this process, I tell them now, like, be prepared. The first couple of weeks is going to be, you're not going to like me, because you're going to be so gassy and so bloated that you're going to wonder like what is going on. But it's absolutely, I said, just stay with me, because after a couple of weeks it's going to be amazing. And so, I would try those things, and and I started sleeping. I just started sleeping more. I started allowing, and that's a key thing for a woman, especially a controlling woman like myself. I started allowing my husband to take over more responsibility for the baby, which was something I had a lot of trouble doing, actually, and saying that it was okay. I forgave myself for not being able to do everything. And so that allowed me, amazingly, just that forgiveness allowed me to sort of let go of so many things, where I said, okay, it's okay if I don't exercise every day. Ironically, I'm a huge proponent of exercise, but I was exercising in a negative way when I was overtired, didn't have enough resources, and that exercise was hurting me. So I needed to allow myself to recover. I started sleeping. I started doing yoga. I started, I cut down my stress. And most importantly, I forgave myself for what I could not do. And then I got better. I got so much better. And that just really fed the process of learning and healing and wanting to make changes.
Let's talk about that healing process, because I know that eventually you were able to come off of those medications that you were talking about. that you were not necessarily thrilled with those side effects. So how long was it after changing your diet and really becoming focused on that you were able to come off of those meds? And what was that process like? I always worry that people hear this and they're like, I'm going to stop taking these right away, just cold tofu, as the vegans like to say. So, what was that process like for you? How quickly did you start to feel better?
So I started feeling better within weeks of changing my diet. But I was also taking medication. So the scientist in me was not sure that it was the diet or the medication just working. So I wasn't sure for some time. Months would go by, and I was really starting to have fewer and fewer side effects, and just feeling like myself again, and just trim and strong and healthy. And that hadn't happened during all the time that I was taking the drugs. I hadn't really felt clean and healthy until sort of getting my lifestyle improved. And then I went back to the rheumatologist and I said, look, I'm doing all these things and I really feel I'm better. My inflammatory markers are incredibly better. Let's start weaning the drugs. And he said, no. He said, you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. You will be on medications for life. You cannot come off these meds. Um, and I went home disheartened. And I continued to take the meds, continued to work on my lifestyle, continued to learn and read. And then I switched rheumatologists.
And this was the same rheumatologist who told you, like, get used to this. This is the way life is going to be when you first went there and were diagnosed, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
The rheum-
Was that nerve-wracking for you though? I mean, I know that you had made all of these lifestyle improvements. You said you were feeling better at that point, but still, I mean, coming off of those medications, even though you really wanted to give it a try, it must have been a little bit nerve-wracking for you.
A little bit. It was a huge amount of nerve wracking. Yes, absolutely. I was totally freaked out and scared because, you don't want to. I was finally in a place where I felt like maybe I'm good. Maybe I need to listen to the smarter people in the room who are not me. I'm not a rheumatologist. I should listen to these people. And so I absolutely, because I get an email or two a day sometimes asking me how I came off my medications. And I would say that I did not do it lightly. I did not just come off cold tofu. I did not do that. I did it slowly, judiciously. I looked at my labs, I checked everything, and I did it under the care of a rheumatologist. And so I don't recommend a cold turkey tofu. I don't recommend that. I recommend you do it sort of judiciously, and it takes time. And some people's gut, and they've been sick for so long, it takes longer to recover. And that should not be considered a failure. Just because I was able to come off medications and somebody else isn't, it's not a failure of lifestyle. It just means that sometimes some people need a little bit more. Their bodies have been sicker for longer and it takes longer to turn. And not everybody can suppress all of the inflammation because sometimes we don't know what all the inflammatory triggers are. And not everybody's going to have the same results, but so many people will get better. And that's what you hang on to. And so I'm glad you brought that up because I do think I do get so many emails asking me that question, like, you've given me hope. And I love that. I want to give everyone hope that you can get better because you can. But will you come off in 5 days? Well, it took me a year. It took me over a year to wean my medications. So once I met the new rheumatologist, we talked about it, and he was just sort of more in line with my mentality. And we talked a lot about lifestyle. He said, the truth is, I don't know the answer to a lot of these things that you're bringing up, which is okay. Not every physician, most physicians will know nothing about nutrition and lifestyle. But he said, I'm willing to try and work with you because I do think that there's something to what's happening to you. And we always have the ability to go back. You just have to be aware that if we wean, sometimes if it flares, that you have to be on more medication than when you started. And so you're hearing all these things and you're scared and you're thinking, like, what the hell am I doing? What the heck am I doing here? And am I really going to be this crazy? Am I really going to take this leap of faith? So it took me a long time emotionally to prepare to do this. And I remember when I did it 2 weeks before my first triathlon. I stopped taking my meds. Uh, and
Hold on, talk to me about the timing of that because oh my god, that just seems like ultra nerve-wracking. You've got this huge thing coming up and now you're going to make this huge decision as far as your treatment. Oh my goodness.
I know, so crazy, right? So what happened was is that I started working with a rheumatologist, and so the new rheumatologist suggested that I cut my medication 1 tablet per week. No, I'm sorry, 1 tablet per 3 months. So you're taking like 30 milligrams, which is like 5 or 6 tablets, I can't remember, and then per week, and you take them once a week. And I remember that every 3 months, he said I could decrease by 1 tablet. And then I would check my labs concurrently. Like, so it was very slow, very judicious, and very analytical. And so as we made the changes, we would wait, we would watch, we would think, kind of reassess. Um, I maybe have gone a little faster than he wanted me to, but it definitely still took about a year. And then I was due to come off my last medication, my last pill, around the time of my triathlon. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to do it a couple weeks before and then just be light and free. And I remember I did that triathlon, and I don't know if you've ever seen, I should send a picture to you of me coming out of the water that triathlon, because first of all, it was my first triathlon. Secondly, I suck as a swimmer and I had to get the training as in my swimming because I just was a terrible swimmer. And I came out of the water and I remember there was no greater pride than I felt at that moment because I had 3 children that were still so little. I had recovered. I had made these babies that I didn't, wasn't sure I was going to be able to even have a kid. And I had these 3 amazing kids cheering for me with my fabulous husband. And then I had just come off my medications and I was able to overcome a swim, and I suck at swimming. And I remember coming out of that water being like, okay, I did it. I did it. I remember that there was no greater pride, I think, than that moment when I came out of that water. Even my son to this day remembers that moment. He goes, Mommy, I remember you coming out of the water and I remember that smile.
Oh, but there I am. Yeah, I mean, geez Louise, what an emotional day. I mean, that sense of accomplishment and not only being your first triathlon, but at that point, I mean, you might as well have just climbed Mount Everest. I mean, just an incredible turnaround. And I personally am really proud of you. I mean, for
Thank
making
you.
those changes and investigating everything and coming to this solution and research and now paying it forward. Um, I want to touch on a couple of other things as we wrap up here. You mentioned your kids, and initially you thought maybe the pregnancy did play a role in this. And I know one of the emotions that you struggled with initially with your diagnosis was maybe a little bit of resentment to your youngest because it was after her birth that you started to develop all of these symptoms that is really difficult. Do you feel like you maybe harbored a little bit of resentment toward her because maybe you weren't ready yet to think that it was something that you were doing to yourself at that point? Or I mean, just talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that these were not my finest moments. And after baby number 3, I looked at my husband, and when I started getting sick, I remember asking him, I was like, "What did we do here? Like, what were we thinking having a third kid?" As it is, you knew people had already said, "Why are you having 3 kids when you're pregnant?" This is, you already have a boy and a girl. You hear so much of that. And when I remember thinking and saying to my husband, what were we thinking? Like, why did we do this? And because I was in such a dark place, remember, I was blaming clothes companies for my ability not to snap and changing my shoes. I blamed her. I blamed my poor little baby girl for being the reason for why I got sick. And it's one of my darkest and most embarrassing moments, where I harbored resentment that she was to blame, not me, clearly not me, but it was because I had her that I had gotten sick. And so, when I got better and started healing, that's why I wrote the book, isn't it? I write that chapter 2 of the book because I tell her, because she's read that chapter and she cried. She goes, "Mama, I made you sick." And I said, "Baby, you didn't make me sick. You were actually the reason I got better, because it was only because of her that I learned how to heal." And so I always tell her she's the one who saved me.
Yeah. Wow. That is a heck of a way to definitely look at that. And I personally would not beat yourself up. I don't want to editorialize here, but I think that the emotions you are feeling, you're just human at that point. And so every emotion possible is going to be on the table, you know? So I think that when somebody's going through such trauma and they're so hurt and they're so confused and they're so much just trying to figure everything out, like emotions are going to be what emotions are going to be, but at no point did you love your child any less, you know?
Yes, no, I appreciate you saying that. I definitely, have had to go through that process, and also with my kid, because now she's old enough to understand and see the story and how it's played out. And so it's a process that we've had to go through together to kind of talk about, because yeah, no, I know that emotions, and I appreciate you saying that, because y- but I definitely will always carry a little bit of sadness that I had so much anger. There will always be a little of that. I do forgive myself for it, and she forgives me for it. And I do truly believe that it's because of her that I'm better, because I know that I would never be on this path. I mean, it's changed my whole life. I mean, I practice preventive cardiology and plant-based nutrition, and I teach people about meditation in my clinic, and I do breathing exercises with them. And I'm probably the only cardiologist in the country that teaches people how to breathe and meditate. It's so crazy. And so, but it's so fabulous. And it's because of her that I can, and I truly thank her for that every day. She is
Yeah,
truly a
Yeah, absolutely. Look, everything happens for a reason. You know, that's cliche to say, but it is true. Let's end on a super positive note. Well, an inquisitive one anyway. And I think that I can't let you escape this interview without asking, what is it that Dr. Monica Aggarwal eats in a day now? If somebody has been listening to this interview, has become inspired by your story, and wants to begin making dietary changes themselves, what is it that you're eating? What are some of the top foods you would recommend?
Okay. So, positive note. So, I love to eat, and I love to eat. I love to get fresh foods, and I love to grow a lot of food. So we grow a lot of our vegetables. I have the benefit of living in Florida, and so I grow a load of our greens in our yard. And my husband is not to be ignored because he does a lot of the growing. So for breakfast, so people, I outline in my clinic when people come in, they'll say, "Oh, I eat really well." I'm like, "Okay, what's for breakfast? What's for lunch?" I go through every single food item that they eat. I Google the items that they tell me they eat that I've never heard of, so I can look at the nutritional content. So I like everything on the table. So those are the things that I go through, because I think there's so much to be found in what people are eating. So what do I eat? So I eat for breakfast. I often will eat 100% whole wheat bread, 2 pieces. Usually, though, the only place I order bread from, because I think most bread is junk, they make their bread with no oil, no sugar, and no preservatives. So it's 100% whole wheat. So I eat whole wheat bread, and I usually put hummus and alfalfa sprouts. That's my breakfast these days. Sometimes I'll put avocado. Sometimes I will do hummus and tomato and black pepper. That's usually my breakfast, with blueberries, a cup of tea with turmeric, usually green tea and turmeric, and sometimes, yeah, usually that's what I eat. And then a couple hours later, I usually have a handful of cashews, because I'm addicted to raw cashews. They're loaded in magnesium. Often I'll use walnuts because they have a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. I told you in my tea, I have turmeric because that's a very anti-inflammatory spice. For lunch, I usually have 2 or 3 glasses of water, maybe a carbonated water if I'm feeling like I need some fizz. And I have a massive salad. Usually the salad is bigger than my head. It is so massive. And I eat, usually I'm growing a load of kale. So I always eat kale. I chop it up really finely. I often put a tablespoon or 2 of hummus. I use balsamic vinegar, not vinaigrette, vinegar. I eat every vegetable that's rotting in my fridge. My husband tells me it's the trash can salad, because whatever's rotting, I throw into there. I'm like, oh, that's good enough. I often put kimchi in it, or sauerkraut, but I prefer kimchi because it has a little bit of a bite. What else do I put in? I put nutritional yeast in it for my B12. I often put tofu in it. I often put chickpeas in it. Not all of it all at once necessarily, but different varieties of those concoctions all the time. And then that salad I usually eat at 1 o'clock, and then I usually can't finish it, so I eat the rest of it at 3 o'clock. And I usually have an orange somewhere along the way because I have the benefit of living in Florida and I love citrus. And usually that's it. I don't often have dinner. I don't find that I need dinner. I'm at a point where I find that I have such nourishing breakfast, snacks, and lunch that usually around 3 or 4 o'clock, I'm done for the day. I know that that seems strange to a lot of people, and I'm not sort of necessarily advocating that for everyone. But for me, I find that I often don't need dinner. And then I'm usually good until the morning the next day. And so I find that those are the foods I eat. I have a vitamin D supplement. And other than that, I don't take any other supplements.
Can I just tell you that that salad sounds amazing? I mean,
Mhm.
I throw a lot of stuff in mine too. I call it the kitchen sink. I mean, what you have are 2 kitchen sinks in your salad. That is just incredible.
It is an incredible salad. My husband looks at it like, "Are you going to really eat that?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm going to really eat that." And I'm going to eat because he just thinks it's so much food. How am I going to eat it? But I eat it at 12. I eat it again at 2 or 3. Like I just eat it a couple. I eat the whole thing. It takes time, and there's a lot of roughage.
Yeah, but you man, but you get down. That is phenomenal. See, I wanted to end on a high note, and daggone it, that salad is definitely a high note. I love that so much.
Yes, I'm glad.
Well, I'm so glad that you were able to join us for, gosh, I mean, close to an hour at this point. Just truly a remarkable story, and I can't again begin to express how happy I am for you and proud I am of you. And just for your patience. I mean, everything that you have been through now is making you a better doctor today. And so I think that your patients are also reaping the benefit of everything that you went through. So it did serve a purpose. And I'm so glad that you were able to share that story with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate hearing that. It means a lot.
If you feel like you've raised your health IQ by a couple of points, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and leave a nice comment below. And to hear the entire interview, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your shows from and subscribe to The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. And please leave a 5-star rating.